The Substitute, Stalker Teacher Horror Story, True Scary Experience. I remember the first time I saw him outside of school. It was dark and I was walking home alone. At first I thought the footsteps behind me belonged to some random passerby, but when I turned I saw his face, the same face from English class that morning, the man who'd called himself my substitute teacher, and he was smiling with this wicked look. This happened when I was 15. My name is Marcus. It was my first day back at high school after summer break, and I was nervous enough already. New classes, new teachers, new everything. I never thought that a normal first day would turn into something I still can't talk about without feeling sick. That morning started like any other. The smell of fresh wax still lingered in the hallways, and the air conditioning rattled against the Texas heat outside. The school was buzzing, friends reuniting, lockers slamming, teachers trying to corral the chaos. When I found my way to English class, though, something was off. Instead of the teacher listed on my schedule, there was a man I didn't recognize. He looked older than most of the teachers, late 40s maybe, with a semi-bald head and pale, tired-looking eyes. He didn't smile when he introduced himself, just stood there at the front of the room, stiff and uncomfortable, before finally saying his name, Mr. Harlan. He said he was the substitute. At first I didn't think much of it. Substitutes were normal, but the way he carried himself wasn't. He didn't act nervous like most subs. He acted deliberate, like every move had been rehearsed. Then roll call started. When he called my name, he lingered on it, drew out my last name just a little too long, as if he'd practiced it beforehand. When I looked up, his eyes were still locked on me. Everyone else he glanced at for a second. But me, his gaze didn't move. The class went on, or at least it was supposed to, but he barely taught anything. Instead, he asked strange questions, way too personal. Who walked to school, whose parents worked late, who had after-school jobs. At first people laughed nervously, joking that he was quirky, but the longer it went on, the more it felt like he was mapping us, taking notes in his head. When the final bell rang, I thought I was in the clear, but as I stood to leave, his hand suddenly pressed down on my desk. The sound of his nails tapping against the wood froze me in place. Marcus, he said, his voice low, you stay. The rest of the room emptied quickly. I remember how quiet it got, the sound of the door clicking shut. My stomach twisted into knots as he leaned down close enough that I could smell stale coffee on his breath. You walk home, don't you? His lips curled in the faintest smile. I'll see you. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my bag and left, nearly tripping over myself to get out the door. That night, the thought wouldn't leave my head. His words, his stare, the way his hand lingered on my desk. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe he was just awkward. But the next day when I was walking home after practice, I heard it, the slow crunch of shoes on gravel behind me. I turned, and my stomach dropped. It was him, Mr. Harlan. No car, no reason to be anywhere near my neighborhood. Just him, walking behind me with that same expressionless face. I ran. For days afterward I couldn't shake it, and it didn't stop. The next morning he was outside near the school gates before classes started. That afternoon he was across the street from the bus stop, always at a distance, always watching. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but then one day in class I caught him scribbling something in a notebook. When he noticed me staring, he closed it fast and gave me this strange half-smile like he wanted me to know. A few days later, I stayed late for basketball practice. By the time I left, the parking lot was mostly empty, just the sound of the crickets outside. As I walked toward the road, I noticed a car parked a few rows away. Its engine was off, but I could see the silhouette of someone sitting inside, watching. It was him. I froze for a second, my heart slamming in my chest before bolting down the road. I didn't stop running until I was inside my house with every lock bolted. I tried telling the school. When I explained that the substitute was creeping me out, they brushed it off. He's just filling in. You probably misunderstood. That was the exact phrase they used, misunderstood, but it wasn't a misunderstanding. The next week I was walking to school early one morning. The streets were quiet and the sun was barely up. I heard the faint sound of someone behind me. I sped up, but the sound matched me. I turned down a side street, my heart just pounding like crazy. That's when I felt a hand grab my backpack hard. I spun around, swinging my arm out of reflex, and came face to face with him. Mr. Harlan. His grip on my bag was tight, but his voice was calm. You walk alone a lot, he said. You really shouldn't. I yanked myself free and ran. I didn't stop until I was inside the school building. I remember leaning against the bathroom wall, shaking, trying to catch my breath. At that point, I knew this wasn't something I could just ignore. I told my parents everything. They were furious and went straight to the administration. Finally, the school started looking into it, but even then I could tell they weren't taking it seriously enough until another student came forward. A girl from my grade reported that he'd followed her after school too. Same thing. The stairs, the strange comments, the car parked near her house. That was when things unraveled. The school dug deeper, and what they found made my skin crawl. Mr. Harlan wasn't a teacher at all. He had forged credentials, faked documents, even falsified background checks. Somehow he had slipped through the cracks and gotten himself approved for substitute assignments, and for weeks he'd been using that position to stalk students. The police got involved, but by the time they started looking for him, he had vanished. His fake records didn't lead anywhere. No real address, no real work history. He just disappeared. To this day, I don't know if they ever caught him. Sometimes I wonder if he moved on to another school, another town, another group of kids to watch, but I'll never forget the look on his face that first day when he leaned over my desk, smiling like he already owned my fear, and I'll never forget that night, walking home alone, hearing footsteps behind me, when I turned and saw his smile glowing in the dark. Think that was disturbing? Trust me, it only gets worse from here. Subscribe to Sites of Horror and keep your lights on tonight. The locker. Trapped horror. You shouldn't have opened it. First thing I noticed was the scratching. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, like fingernails dragging across metal just a few feet away from me. The hall was empty. Every door was closed, but the sound was coming from my locker. When I pulled it open, I expected to see books or maybe some stupid prank. Instead, someone shoved me inside. This happened when I was 14. My name is Jenna, and it was my first day of freshman year. I was already late because I couldn't find my locker. The hallway smelled like bleach, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the place felt too bright, too loud, like the whole building was pressing down on me. The first day at a new school is always nerve-wracking, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to find. When I finally found locker 317, my heart was already pounding in my chest. The hallway was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you know you're alone. I fumbled with the combination, my hands slightly shaking, and shoved my books inside, eager to get this awkward moment over with. That's when I noticed something strange wedged between the vents of the locker door. A small, crumpled piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there before. It was a folded piece of lined notebook paper, the kind you'd pass in class when the teacher wasn't looking. My curiosity got the better of me, and I reached in to pull it out, feeling the rough edges between my fingers. At first I thought it was from a previous student, maybe just some trash left behind, or a forgotten love note that never made it to its intended recipient. I almost tossed it aside without a second thought, but something about the way it was folded, so deliberate and precise, made me pause. When I opened it, my stomach dropped and a chill ran down my spine. The handwriting was jagged, almost rushed, but the message was clear. "Welcome, Jenna. Let's see how long you last." Just 10 words, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. My name. Someone knew who I was, and they wanted me to know it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Instinctively, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. The hallway suddenly felt colder, the fluorescent lights above flickering as if on cue. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Kids rushed past me, slamming locker doors, laughing, and hurrying to class as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Their voices echoed off the walls, but I felt completely isolated, like I was standing in the eye of a storm. No one seemed to be paying attention to me. I was just another face in the crowd, invisible and alone. Even as the hallway buzzed with life all around me, it was as if the note was meant for my eyes only. I crumpled the note in my fist, trying to play it off as some dumb prank. Maybe it was just a cruel joke, a twisted way to welcome the new kid. I stuffed it deep into my backpack, hoping no one had seen my reaction. High school kids can be cruel, and I'd heard stories about how they treated outsiders. Maybe this was just their way of testing me, seeing if I'd crack under pressure. I forced myself to look calm and composed, putting on a brave face as I closed my locker and blended into the crowd. I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me freak out, no matter how much my hands trembled. But as I walked to my first class, the words from the note echoed in my mind, impossible to shake. Who had written it? Why me? The fear lingered in the back of my mind all morning, a constant reminder that I was being watched and that my first day at this school was going to be anything but ordinary. At lunch, I found myself drifting back to my locker, telling myself I just needed to grab a book. The hallway was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own footsteps echoing off the linoleum. I could hear the distant chatter from the cafeteria, but here it felt like I was in a different world, one where every sound was amplified, every shadow stretched a little longer. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But it was there, just beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights. It sounded exactly like fingernails dragging against metal, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably real. I froze mid-step, my heart thudding in my chest. For a moment I wondered if someone was playing a prank, but the hallway was deserted. The hall was completely empty, not a single person in sight. The silence pressed in, making the scratching seem even louder, even though it was barely more than a whisper. I couldn't help myself. I slowly leaned in, pressing my ear against the cool metal vents of my locker. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Each sound was spaced out, deliberate, as if someone or something wanted me to hear it. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was inside, or at least that's how it felt. My chest tightened, and I could feel my pulse racing in my ears. With trembling hands, I yanked the door open, half expecting something to leap out at me, but all I found were my books, stacked neatly just as I'd left them. Nothing else. No sign of anyone, no explanation for the noise. But then I noticed something new. There was another note, just like before, tucked in a place I couldn't miss. This one was taped to the inside wall, right at eye level. My hand shook as I reached for it, my mind racing with questions. The note was short, just one word: closer. My throat went dry as I read it. The handwriting was the same as before, sharp and hurried, almost desperate. Panic surged through me. I slammed the locker shut, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. Without looking back, I practically ran back toward the cafeteria, trying to act normal, to blend in with the crowd. But I could feel eyes on me, even though I knew no one was there. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, no matter how tightly I clutched my backpack. I tried to steady my breathing, but every time I replayed the sound in my head, my nerves spiked all over again. The rest of the day was a blur. I sat in class staring at the board, but the words didn't make sense. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the locker, to the note, to the scratching that seemed to echo in my memory. Every time I passed that row of lockers, it felt like something was waiting for me, just out of sight, just beyond the metal doors. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever left that note was still there, watching, waiting for me to come closer. By dismissal, most of the kids had cleared out. The hallways were quieter, dimmer, and, eerily hollow. I tried to avoid my locker completely, but the scratching came again, louder this time. I stopped dead in my tracks. It echoed through the row of lockers, rhythmic and relentless. Against my better judgment, I pulled the door open. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. One moment I was walking down the hallway. It was usually quiet and empty. The next thing was a rough shove from behind sent me stumbling forward right toward the open jaws of a locker. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized what was happening, but before I could twist away, someone's hands pressed hard against my back, forcing me inside. The door slammed shut behind me with a metallic clang that echoed in my ears. In an instant I was swallowed by darkness. Thick, suffocating, absolute. It was as if the world outside had vanished, leaving me trapped in a tiny, airless void. The space was so tight I could barely breathe. My shoulders were wedged between cold, unforgiving metal, and my knees were jammed up against my chest. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through my body, and the air felt thin, stale, and heavy. My elbows and knees banged against the cold metal as I tried to shift, desperate for even an inch of space. The sharp edges dug into my skin, leaving me feeling bruised and helpless. Panic started to rise in my chest, making it even harder to breathe. I screamed, pounding with everything I had, fists slamming against the door and sides, but the thick metal walls swallowed my voice. My cries were muffled, barely more than a whisper to anyone outside. I wondered if anyone could hear me at all, or if I was completely alone. Then just as I was about to scream again, I felt it, a presence. At first I thought it was just my imagination, the product of fear and darkness. But then I heard it, breathing, not mine, slow, shallow, and far too close. Hot, shallow breaths, right against my ear. The air grew warmer, humid with each exhale, and I could feel the tiny hairs on my neck stand up. My own breath caught in my throat as I realized I wasn't alone in here. And then a voice whispered, so close I could feel the words brush my skin, "You shouldn't have opened it." The words sent a chill racing down my spine, colder than the metal pressing into my back. I tried to turn, to see who or what was in there with me, but there was no room to move. I thrashed against the door, clawing at the vents, my fingernails scraping against the metal until they ached. I screamed until my throat went raw, the sound tearing from my lungs in a desperate plea for help, but no one came. The The hallway outside was silent, or maybe my own panic drowned out everything else. The air grew stifling, thick with fear and sweat. Every inhale was sharp and sour, burning my lungs. I could feel beads of sweat trickling down my forehead, mixing with the condensation forming on the metal walls. The locker felt smaller with every passing second, as if it was closing in around me. Suddenly I felt something graze my arm. Fingers cold, unfamiliar, and impossibly deliberate. They moved slowly, as if savoring the moment, sending a wave of terror through my body, cold and deliberate, dragging slowly across my skin. I froze, paralyzed by fear, every muscle tensed and waiting. In that moment I realized the true horror wasn't just being trapped. It was not knowing what else was trapped in there with me. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes again, a janitor was shaking me awake. They said they found me unconscious in my locker. The explanation? That I locked myself in by accident. But I know that isn't true. There was someone in there with me. When the janitor opened the locker, it was empty. No notes, no person, just me, soaked in sweat, shaking uncontrollably, and honestly too scared to even stand. For weeks after, I avoided that hallway completely. I begged my mom to move me to a different school. She thought I was just being dramatic. But even now, years later, whenever I pass lockers in a school, gym, or at work, I swear I can hear it again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And every time I feel that same hot breath against my ear, whispering the words I can never forget. You shouldn't have opened it. Before you go, ask yourself this. Why do you keep watching? Curiosity or something darker? Subscribe to Sites of Horror to feed the fear. Wrong bus, wrong turn. A horror story you won't forget. The bus doors slammed shut behind me with a sound that didn't feel right. Too sharp, too final. By the time I realized none of the kids on board were from my neighborhood, the driver was already watching me in the mirror, smiling, and drove off. This happened when I was 13. My name is Leah. My first day of middle school, didn't even make it to the building. I got on the wrong bus. It had pulled up late, groaning to a stop, and the driver waved me in with a quick, impatient gesture. He was older, heavy-set, his beard patchy and rough, mirrored sunglasses covering his eyes. I didn't recognize him, but I told myself it was probably just a substitute driver. I climbed on. The smell of stale air hit me the moment I stepped onto the bus, thick and unmoving, as if it had been trapped there for days. There was something sour, too, a sharp tang that clung to the inside of the bus and seemed to seep into my clothes, making me want to hold my breath. The rubber floor tugged at the soles of my sneakers as I walked down the aisle, each step making a faint, sticky sound that echoed in the silence. I slid into a seat in the middle, hugging my backpack tightly against my chest, as if it could shield me from the uneasy feeling already twisting inside me. My heart thudded a little faster, and I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just nerves. At first I thought it was just nerves. First day jitters maybe, or the weirdness of a new routine, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I started to notice the other kids. None of them looked familiar. Not a single face from my street or anyone I'd seen in class before. It was like I'd stepped onto the wrong bus entirely. I scanned their faces quickly, searching for a hint of recognition, but all I found were blank stares. The kids didn't talk, didn't laugh, didn't even whisper to each other the way kids usually do on a bus. They just sat, motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead as if they were waiting for something. The silence pressed in on me, thick and unnatural. It felt almost staged, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a cue I didn't understand. The only sound was the steady, low rumble of the engine as the bus pulled away from the curb, the vibration humming through the floor and up into my legs. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of my seat so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to convince myself everything was fine. "This is bus 22, right?" I asked the driver, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping for some reassurance. There was no answer, but in the rear-view mirror I saw it, the slow, deliberate curl of his lips into a smile. It wasn't friendly. My chest tightened instantly, and I realized something was very, very wrong. I pulled out my phone. Looking around it at all the strange faces, I tried texting my mom. There was no service. That didn't make sense. We lived in the middle of town, not in the middle of nowhere. I stared at the screen, tapped it, shook it, hoping for a single bar. Nothing. That's when I noticed the windows, and something about them made my skin crawl. They weren't just fogged up like you'd expect on a cold night. They were wet, dripping with condensation, as if the bus itself was alive and sweating, exhaling some strange, heavy breath into the night. The glass blurred the view outside, making everything look stretched and warped, as if the world beyond was melting away or slipping out of reach. It was hot outside, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin, but somehow inside that bus it felt damp and cold, almost clammy. Minutes passed. The bus kept moving and moving. but it never stopped, not even once. No one was getting off, not a single passenger stirred. No one was getting on either. The doors would open at empty stops, then close again with a hiss, leaving the silence untouched. The road outside stretched further and further into places I didn't recognize, past neighborhoods I'd never seen, then past nothing but thick trees and endless stretches of asphalt. The silence pressed harder, growing heavier with every mile. My stomach sank. Finally I stood. My knees trembled, but I forced myself upright, gripping the seat in front of me for support. I think I'm on the wrong bus, and for the first time I wondered if I'd ever get off. That's when I heard it. The sharp, final click of the doors locking. The bus slowed, gravel crunching under the tires as it turned onto a dirt road swallowed by trees. The further it drove, the darker it seemed to get. Dust swirled around us. Shadows crawled across the windows. The driver pulled the bus to a stop. The engine rumbled for a moment, then fell silent. Not one of the kids moved. Not one of them even blinked. Their heads turned slowly toward me, their eyes blank and glassy. The driver stood, his boots heavy against the floor as he turned down the aisle, his face twisted into a grin that didn't look human. His voice was low, gravelly, deliberate. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." My heart stopped. My legs refused to move. It felt like my whole body had been chained to that seat. But when he took a step closer, something inside me snapped. I bolted. I shoved past the nearest row, my shoulder banging hard against the glass. I sprinted to the back, yanking at the emergency exit handle. The door rattled, stiff, but then it gave way. I jumped. The ground rushed up hard, knocking the wind out of me. My knees scraped, my palms burned, but I didn't stop. "Hey!" his voice thundered after me. The pounding of his boots hit the aisle, closer, faster. I pushed myself up and ran into the woods. Branches snapped against my arms, tore at my shirt, scratched across my face. My lungs screamed for air. My heart slammed so violently I thought it might burst. Behind me, the engine roared to life. The grinding of gears and the rumble of tires shook the dirt road. The bus was moving again, slowly, like it was hunting. The woods swallowed me, but even as I stumbled forward, I swore I could still hear the crunch of gravel trailing just behind. I didn't stop until I saw it, a break in the trees, asphalt glinting in the sun, a road, a way out. I burst onto the empty road, my heart pounding, waving my arms frantically at the first car I saw, desperate for someone to stop and help me escape the nightmare I'd just endured. Out of nowhere, a silver sedan screeched to a halt. A woman jumped out, her eyes wide in shock and concern as she took in my disheveled appearance and trembling hands. She ran to me without hesitation, her hands grabbing my shoulders firmly, grounding me in reality as I struggled to catch my breath. "What happened? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry, searching my face for answers. I gasped for air, my chest tight, and pointed back toward the woods, unable to form words at first, my mind racing with fear. "The bus," I finally managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "The bus," I repeated, panic rising in my throat as I tried to make her understand. But when she turned to look where I pointed, there was nothing there, just an empty wooded area and an ominous stretch of road. No sound, no dust, no engine, just silence so thick it pressed against us. She called the police. Eventually the police arrived, their flashing lights breaking the stillness. I told them everything, the driver, his wild beard, the dark sunglasses, the unsettling way he smiled at me, and the eerie silence of the kids who never spoke a word. I described the dirt road that seemed to swallow us whole, twisting deeper into the woods, as if it wanted to keep us hidden forever. I told them how the bus had locked me in, trapping me inside. The police searched for days, combing every inch of the forest, hoping for a clue, but they never found the bus, never found the driver, never found anything at all, not a single trace, as if it had all vanished into thin air. And strangest of all, no students were ever reported missing. It was as if the bus, the driver, and the children had never existed. Even now, years later, I don't remember how I got out. I don't know if I actually opened that exit or if something else happened. All I know is I ran, and somehow I survived. But every time I see a school bus now, my stomach knots, my hands start to shake, because I hear it again, the sharp final click of those doors locking, and I remember the way he looked at me when he said it, "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Another terrifying story. And yet, the scariest ones haven't been told. Subscribe to Sites of Horror, and whatever you do, don't watch alone.